Okay, well, welcome everybody. I know we have some participants on now, so we're going to get started. And I want to take a few minutes to explain who we are and what this is all about today. So let me start my slides. And I want to talk a little bit about AMAC. AMAC is the Association of Mature American Citizens. And as the slide says, we are a nonpartisan member benefits organization created to serve conservative age 50 plus Americans whose core values were not being represented by other organizations. Basically, the AMAC organization started in 2007, formed by a gentleman by the name of Dan Weber, the late Dan Weber, who was disgruntled with the fact that he felt senior positions and items of importance to seniors were not being adequately represented in Washington. So he created AMAC, and that's what AMAC is all about. We have 2.4 million members, and we're growing rapidly. So that's quickly about AMAC. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. I want to talk about the foundation for a few minutes. But the growing AMAC family consists of AMAC.us, which is the membership organization, which basically represents seniors in Washington. It's a benefits, it has a slate of benefits that go along with membership. And I would direct you to AMAC.us, their website, where you can get all the information about AMAC. AMAC Action, AMACaction.org is basically the advocacy arm of AMAC. And these are the people that spend time on Capitol Hill, basically lobbying with congressmen and representatives and senators, again, conveying the items that are important to American seniors to the policymakers in Washington. And that's a very active part of the AMAC family, the AMACaction.org. AMAC Foundation is what I really want to talk about for just a couple of minutes. AMACfoundation.org is the website for the foundation. And the foundation has a simple mission, and that simple mission is to help protect and ensure the financial security, health, and social lives of current and future mature Americans, and to help Americans navigate the bewildering array of decisions they need to make. And I want to repeat that, the bewildering array of decisions they need to make. That's primarily where the foundation spends its time, helping seniors understand things like Medicare, Social Security, elder fraud, things like that are very, very important to seniors. And I'll say a little bit about how we do that. Basically, what the foundation does week in and week out is we do public seminars on topics that are vital to seniors, just like this one today on advanced directives. We produce publications on matters that affect seniors. We do a lot of written work with respect to Social Security policy, Social Security processes and procedures. And we also operate two dedicated websites, socialsecurity.report.org and medicarereport.org. These are sites that are packed with information about those two topics. The first one, the Social Security, is actually Social Security and retirement issues. We update both of these websites 5 days a week with breaking news of what's happening in those two areas. New policy developments, new legislation, a lot of hints and techniques for planning retirement or planning healthcare coverage and that sort of thing. But those are extremely informative websites packed with content. So I would suggest you take a look at those as well. There's a lot of information there. And then finally, we operate an accredited Social Security advisory program. That gets back to the comment that I just made on the bewildering array of decisions. Social Security is kind of complex. For those of you that are not under Social Security at this point, you need to know that there are a lot of things that you need to be aware of as you approach Social Security and you make your decisions regarding coverage. We have found that there is no real place that seniors can go, or people that are aging into Social Security can go to get credible information about the program and to help them make the decisions that they need to make. And the problem with that is if the decisions are made incorrectly, they're with you for the rest of their life. They're irrevocable. And so we spend a lot of time counseling people on how to approach Social Security and how to make their decisions. And we have 7 accredited advisors that have been trained and they're NSSA accredited, which is the National Social Security Association. And we handle roughly between 600 and 700 inquiries every month, counseling sessions with people, where people will come to us and say, I'm going to be 62, what should I do? And, we'll help them lay out the options and help them make their decisions. So that's the most active part of the foundation. And it's very important and growing rapidly. I want to talk a little bit about VITAS. We have been partnering with VITAS for a number of years now. VITAS and the AMAC Foundation work together on producing a lot of the seminars that we deliver to the public. The VITAS, if you're not aware of it, is the nation's largest single source provider of end-of-life care with a 40-plus year record of community service. We've come to know VITAS very well, and it's a fantastic organization. They have more than 10,000 healthcare professionals that work for VITAS, I should say, and about 4,500 trained volunteers. And they have a network that covers 14 states in the District of Columbia. So it's a very large organization and a very competent organization. And we really appreciate the relationship that we have with them. Now, today's topic is understanding advanced directives. And we have with us today Brittany Berger. Brittany is a registered nurse, and she's VITAS's regional director of admissions. She specializes in the development of admission nurses to help better determine hospice eligibility in terminally ill patients. That's basically what her vocation is. She's also a registered paramedic, and she has a clinical background in emergency medicine, critical care, and hospice and palliative care. So she is really quite adept at what she does, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with her. And she really has this topic fairly detailed explanations for you. Also on the video today is Gloria Puerto. Gloria is VITAS's community educator for Lake and Sumter counties, and she is VITAS 55+ liaison person. Gloria, we've worked with Gloria a number of times, and we just value the relationship we have working with her and VITAS. So that's the end of my advertisement, I guess I would call it. Again, the AMAC growing family consists of the AMAC organization itself, the membership organization, AMAC Action, the lobbying organization, and AMAC Foundation, AMAC's nonprofit arm. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Brittany and let her take it from there.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. No pressure, Gloria. He gave us quite the introduction there.
Unfortunately, we were having audio difficulties, and I can't hear a word that she's saying. So,
thanks, Jerry. All right. So thanks again, Jerry, for the introduction. As he said, my name is Brittany. I'm a nurse here with VITAS Healthcare, and my lovely sidekick is Gloria. And we're going to take you guys through a presentation on advanced directives and also what we call ACP, Advanced Care Planning. All right. Everybody can see okay?
Yes.
All right. So our objective for today is to go over kind of what the origin of advanced directives is, the meaning of advanced directives, kind of give you guys some definitions about what's the difference between advanced care planning and advanced directives. We'll talk about a couple of different types of advanced directives and when you should use them, when you should have them, when you should plan for them. And then, kind of just give you guys some general guidance and resources where you guys can further your education on this. I got to shrink y'all's heads a little bit here. All right. So according to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, advanced care planning is really when you are planning ahead for the decisions that you would want to make when you would be facing a medical crisis. These are your decisions to make, And it's just giving you the voice for in the future, if you are unable to voice what you want to happen and when you want to happen, it's kind of a guide for your family and your loved ones. So the communication about ACP, or advanced care planning, is frequent, it's ongoing, it isn't a conversation that you have one single time with your doctor or your spouse, and then you never talk about it again. This is something that is always developing, it's always changing, and should be, again, a frequent conversation. You want to talk with your doctors about this, your healthcare team. You want to talk to your family. You want things like your culture and your own personal beliefs to be honored during making these decisions. These decisions can be recorded in what we call an advance directive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. So support throughout the disease process. People at any age or stage in their life always need help understanding, what's going on. And they want to have the opportunity to be able to share what their values and their goals, and again, preferences are regarding the care that they may or may not need in the future. There's only a couple of things that are certain in life, right? You have to pay taxes and all of us are going to die. Like, that's what they always say, right? So it's not something that we're going to get out of. It's something that all of us are going to face at some point in life. And so the better prepared that we can be, exactly that, the better we'll be. The discussion, goals, and timing may vary just depending on, are you 30 years old or are you 65 years old? These things may vary based on your religion, your culture. So a lot of different things kind of come into play when having these conversations. So VITAS did a little survey in 2021. And what we found is the growing interest for people to want to talk about end of life wishes, right? If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that, diseases and illnesses don't really know an age. They don't know a race. They don't know any of those things, a wealth status. So what we have found is that so many more people now are interested in having these conversations. 69% of consumers say that discussing end of life care is important to them. Only 56% of those have actually done so. 32% of those people actually put it in writing. So like less than half, right? Half of the people who said, yeah, this is really important, have actually done something about it. 29% of those people said that the pandemic increased the likelihood of them documenting their wishes. And 20% of them said they knew someone who was seriously ill or had died during this pandemic, but they did not know what the patient's wishes were. So I like to make this presentation a little bit personal, right? I don't want to just sit here and read to you guys. So I kind of have some tidbits and things that I like to talk about along the way. So as a nurse, right, I worked in the ER for the very beginning of my career and as a paramedic on an ambulance. And a lot of times we would meet people who were in a crisis, whether it was a horrible car accident, or it was that the normal healthy dad that they had who had never had any medical problems, suddenly, collapsed and stopped breathing from a massive heart attack. And the family comes in and they're faced with these really, really hard decisions. And they sit around and they talk about things, right? They talk about, well, I don't think dad would have wanted this. And, maybe a wife says, I don't think that, I know he would have never wanted a feeding tube. I know that, but if it's in writing, it takes the guesswork out of it, right? It takes all of that out of it. It gives them very clear direction and says, this is what I want and this is what I don't want. So again, just trying to make this a little personal for you guys. We asked patients and families, when should advanced care planning discussions start? And we got a variety of answers. This is the same poll, and they asked the question, kind of what is that benchmark for triggering this conversation? So 55% of people said that it's a specific age, maybe they said 65 or 70. 38% said you should have an advanced care planning conversation if you have a serious illness. 24% of people said when they retire. So I guess that's, I don't know what some people retire earlier, some people retire later. 22% said when their physician brings it up. That breaks my heart because unfortunately, what I see as a hospice and palliative care provider is that we meet people when they're very sick. We meet people when this conversation should have happened a while ago. And what I've found, I'm from a very small town in Lake County, Florida, and these people have been, with this doctor for maybe 20 years, 30 years. There's people who have been, maybe it's the only doctor they've ever had. And these conversations are really difficult. And you would think that someone who's been a part of that person's life for such a long time and has seen them decline would initiate these conversations. But unfortunately, a lot of times it doesn't happen. The doctors don't willingly bring these conversations up. A lot of the common barriers that we get is that 42% of patients will say, but I'm not sick and dying. 26% of people say it's really depressing to think about. Can't really argue that. I mean, it can be a little sad. 23% of people said, I don't know how to create a plan. So those are some of the barriers that, again, were identified during the survey. Many people think that nearing the end of life, that they're unable to make their own decisions about what's going to happen. Of people who indicated their end of life care preferences, most chose care focused on alleviating pain and suffering. So symptoms like pain or shortness of breath, sleeplessness, restlessness, a lot of those unfortunate things that some patients who are ill might experience at end of life. The primary objective of advanced care planning is to ensure that the patient's care that they receive aligns with what their goals and values are at that point in their life. In 2018, 31% of US patients died at home. Only 31%. A survey shows that 71% of Americans would prefer to die at home. So kind of to, bring all of these pieces together and kind of connect those dots, right? That means that 70% of us here in America say that when I reach that final time, I want to die at home. I want to be in my bed. I want to be in the comfort of my own home, but only 31% of people actually get what they want. And it's usually because they haven't expressed their wishes. There's nothing in writing. They haven't put it on paper. Maybe their family panics and sends them to the hospital. And again, we'll elaborate on some of these pieces a little bit more, but that was kind of a shocking number to me. So some of the challenges that we face when we talk about advanced care planning is that clinicians bear the responsibility to initiate this conversation, right? So the doctors and nurses are burdened with this responsibility, but they're uncomfortable, or maybe they haven't been adequately trained to do so, or maybe they are trained, but they're just an ICU nurse who's, suffering through a nursing shortage during the pandemic, and they know that they really should be having this conversation with the patient and their family, but they're just too busy to be able to sit down and stop and give that conversation the calmness and the comfortability for that patient and family to be able to start that conversation. Another challenge is the public's lack of knowledge about what ACP is, about what we should be planning for. Most patients express a desire for an honest conversation, but they wait for their doctor or their nurse to initiate that conversation. The patient doesn't just go in and say, hey doc, tell me like it is. They're waiting for the doctor to bring the information to them. And the lack of concordance with wishes and care provided at the end of life. And so again, I think that just kind of sums up like people haven't put their wishes in writing. And so when somebody goes into crisis or they're unable to make those decisions for themselves, then we're left with the family trying to all put in their 2 cents and give, the what if and the I think he would want type of conversations, which can be challenging in today's healthcare system. In a review of 150 US studies, 36.7% of the population had completed an advance directive. 29.3% had completed a living will that stated what their wishes are. 33% had appointed a healthcare power of attorney. Ill persons are more likely to have completed documents than a healthy person, but it wasn't off by much. If you took the ill population at 38% versus 32% that were healthy, it's not really a big variable there. It just means that not enough people are putting this stuff in writing. And then patients greater than 65 years old are significantly more likely than younger adults to have advanced care planning and their wishes in writing. Only 11% report having a conversation about end of life with their doctor. 11%. That's it. So if I take, a practice, right, a physician's practice that has 500 patients, most of them probably have more than that, only 11% of them have had this conversation with their doctor saying, when I get to this point, these are the things I want, these are the things I don't want. Only 22% of those ages 65 and older have had this conversation with their healthcare provider. So that number to me is just as scary. So what they did a little poll, and they said, how comfortable would you be talking about your own end of life medical wishes with each of the following? 86% of people said, I'm okay talking to my spouse or my partner. 66% said, I'm comfortable talking to my doctor. 60% said, I'm okay with talking to my children. 58% said, I'm okay talking to my parents. And 53% of people said, I'm comfortable talking to a minister or a priest or, your spiritual advisor, your religious affiliation. So to me, it's the conversation with your spouse is obviously almost 90% of the population says, yes, me and my husband or me and my wife have talked about those things. That number gets significantly smaller, right? Another less than, or 20% less than that says that they're comfortable talking to their doctor about it. I'm a child. I've had these conversations with my parents, and they're not that old, because I'll tell you a little story. My mom died when I was 18 from cancer. I was still in high school. I had no medical background. I had no knowledge of what a DNR was. I didn't know what hospice was. All I knew is that my mom was sick and she had cancer, but she was going to get better, right? Because she was in her 40s and the doctors were going to make her better, and she was getting chemo and she was getting all of these things, and they were doing all of these things to make her better. What I didn't know is that the doctors at the time were not talking to my mom about, you're not getting better. And what are we going to do if this doesn't work out? There weren't any of those conversations happening. So unfortunately, my mom, my family only got to have the benefits of our hospice and palliative care team for about 2 weeks before she passed. And we didn't have things in writing. We didn't have, what her exact wishes would be. There was a lot of family conflict. I'm one of 6 children, 6 kids, 6 different opinions. So there's so many different things that if we would have had this in place, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about it because it hits home, it really hits home for me. If we would have had this guidance and someone would have given us all of this information and sat us down and let us talk to our mom about what she does want and doesn't want, I just feel like things could have gone so much smoother for our family during that time. So it's important to have the conversation. And this just broke it down in graphs, saying basically the same thing we just talked about. 51% of the population think that this conversation is really important. The The percent of respondents who support new Medicare benefits paying for advanced care planning, 95% of the population support this, saying that yes, doctors should be paid to have these conversations and to provide this planning and all of this, care planning for their patients and families. And it should be reimbursable for them. What are some opportunities that we have for advanced care planning? I say opportunities as these are the areas that we're lacking in, right? We're lacking in educating and training clinicians. We're lacking in public outreach, right? Having these conversations and getting this information out to the general public. We're lacking systems, documentation of us having these conversations, of physicians having these conversations. And then again, your doctor is not reimbursed for those conversations. Hey guys, give me just a second, okay? Sorry about that, guys. I'm in an office and I'm gonna have to relocate in just a second, but everything's fine. Laura, you guys can still hear me okay? All right. So how has COVID-19 changed advanced care planning? A recent study found that nursing home residents increasingly opted for a do not resuscitate, a DNR, and also opted for a do not hospitalize, a DNH, after they had an advanced care planning conversation with their healthcare provider. So to me, that says a lot. It says that a doctor took the time to sit down with their patient and their family and explain to them that going to the hospital, DNRs, all of these things, how they were providing them a choice of would they want to have to go to the hospital? Would they want to have CPR, intubation, breathing machines and all of these things done at end of life? Or would they rather have a do not hospitalize? So stay where you are here in the nursing home, have the care that you need. And if you're going to pass, then allowing that to happen naturally and providing you all of the care and the comfort that you would need during that time. Another study from West Virginia's Center for End-of-Life Care noted a new sense of urgency regarding advanced care planning. So from January to June of 2020 versus January to June in 2019, there was an increase of advanced care planning submissions overall by about 10%. It says 9, I'm saying 10, 10 sounds better. About 9%, and then 77.18% increase in DNRs. That number is huge, huge. That means, again, that somebody had that conversation and said, I don't want you to do CPR. I don't want you to do chest compressions. I don't want you to put me on the breathing machine. And 46% increase in an electronic directive registry sign up. So e-directives, they call it, where you can go on and fill out an electronic directive and it stays in this registry where people can see it and see what's going on and what your wishes would be. Okay, I have a question from Ms. Stephanie. She says, how is the communication loop closed? Single person, no doctor admitted to the hospital. No one at the hospital knows patient has an ACP, which is at patient's home. How does the ACP info get to the hospital? Stephanie, that's such an amazing question. I'm so glad you asked that. So a couple of different pieces, right? So if you are, if you're that person, I have always told people this, you should always have a copy of your advanced care planning or your advanced directive on file at your primary care doctor's office. you should, if you live close by, like where's your local hospital that you would, if you had to call 911 and get transported, where are they most likely to take you? You can even go to the hospital and have them scan those things in and have them on file there at the hospital, where if something like that were to happen to you, that hospital would have your advanced directives on file. It's also really, really smart to, inside your wallet, most advanced care planning, do not resuscitate orders, living wills, all have a little piece, a little like card size piece that's part of the document that you can cut out and stick it in your wallet. So, and stick it like with your insurance card. If I was an ER nurse, so I would always check somebody's wallet. If they were in a car accident and they couldn't talk to me, if the fire department already hasn't pulled out your wallet to look and see what's in there, I'm going to look for those things. So emergency medicine personnel, so EMTs, firefighters, ER staff, are trained to look in specific places for those items. So I hope that answers your question, but that would be my best advice. And we'll cover that a little bit more at the end, some kind of important tips and pieces that you guys can add to your notes for this session to just follow up on if you haven't already done so. So did I answer your question, Stephanie? Okay, great. All right, moving. I'm not going to go over this big graph with you guys. It basically just shows that patients that pass away in a hospital, 50% of them don't have any living will or anything. And that's usually why we don't know what their wishes are, because they didn't have those things in writing. I'm not going to go over that graph either. Okay, ACP outcomes. So statistically speaking, what kind of conversation, what are the outcomes of these conversations? So discussions about end-of-life care. Someone is 2 times as likely to accept advanced diagnoses. They're 2 times as likely to be opposed to death in ICU. So that means they're 2 times more likely to say, not happening. Don't put me in the hospital. I don't want to die in ICU. I don't want to die in the hospital. They are 3 times as likely to complete a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. Almost twice as likely to complete a power of attorney, and we'll talk about that more. It gives control back to the patients and offers more hope, right? That hope that I'm gonna be in control. I'm gonna remain in control, and even though I might not be able to control my disease and the progression of my disease, I'm still going to be in control. And are not associated with psychological distress compared to those who don't have end-of-life discussions. So for me, again, I take it very personally. I think about the turmoil and how stressed myself, my siblings, my father all were, and how stressed everybody was because we never had a plan. We never had this discussion. And so again, I just go back to, man, I really wish we would have had all of these things in place, because then we would have had a source to turn to and say, this is what we're going to do because this is what mom wanted. Some studies show that ACP conversations improved multiple outcomes. So fewer hospitalizations and intense treatment at end of life, meaning when things got really bad, that recognition of this is where I am. It doesn't mean you can't go get treated. It just means that less people were likely to have intensive, things done to them at end of life. There was an increased enrollment in hospice for patients who had advanced care planning because they knew the benefits, they understood what hospice and palliative care were. The greater likelihood of the person dying in the setting of their choice, right? I go back to that one of those first slides where it says 71% of people want to die at home, but only 31% of them get that wish. Increased satisfaction. A 2017 outcome review study was unable to determine if the ACP impacts actual end-of-life care. So the variables were kind of skewed. Again, I think that's because we just don't have proper documentation that we're actually having these conversations and doing this. So a little bit about the history of advanced directives. This is a product of patient consumer rights movements between 1960s and 1970s, when the US Supreme Court established that patients have a constitutional right to refuse life-sustaining treatment, right? They call it the right of refusal. The courts gradually decided that withdrawal of care was morally equivalent to a patient's refusal and extended these rights to patients without decisional capacity through their healthcare surrogate. So what all that mumbo jumbo means is that in the 1960s and 70s, it was recognized that if I'm alert and oriented and I say, I don't want to have that treatment done, I have the right to refuse. The same privileges should be granted to a patient who's on a ventilator, who can't voice what their wishes are. And it basically, if somebody's going to be withdrawn from life support, it's the same thing as somebody refusing to have treatment done. And so that was implemented into our constitutional rights. In 1990, Congress passed the Patient Self-Determination Act, or PSDA, incentivizing healthcare entities to implement programs that provided all adult patients at the time of admission or enrollment with information about what their rights are under state laws regarding healthcare decision-making. So if you've been to a hospital or you've been to, a surgery center or anything recently, you've signed, something saying that you have been provided information on advanced directives, and you've been given the opportunity to say who your healthcare surrogate is. If something happens to you, who's going to make those decisions? As part of this, institutions must inform patients of several different rights. So the right to participate in and direct their own healthcare decisions. They have the right to refuse medical or surgical treatment. They have the right to prepare an advance directive and to review information on institutional policies governing these rights. So you could ask and say, I want to know what your policy is. We'll talk about a couple cases. I won't harp on this, but these are some of the historical legal cases in the United States that helped implement our constitutional changes in the 60s and 70s, and kind of where these came from. This is the case of Karen Ann. She was 21 years old. She collapsed. She stopped breathing. And 5 months later, in 1975, she was diagnosed. They said she would be in a vegetative state forever, and her parents requested to take her off of the ventilator. But the doctors and the county prosecutor said they can't. They're like, nope, 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 you can't do it. And the parents took this case to court. 10 years later, eventually she was weaned from the respirator, and she survived nearly 10 more years in a complete vegetative state. This is the case of Nancy Cruzan. Congress passed the PSDA Act in 1990 in a response to this case. 25 years old, she was in a car accident. She was thrown out of the car. The paramedics who arrived on scene did a great job. They were able to resuscitate her, and several weeks later, they had a feeding tube placed in her. Almost 5 years later, her parents requested that they remove the feeding tube. They were like, we don't want to do this anymore. Almost 6 years later, Cruzan's parents were authorized to request the withholding of food and water. A couple months later, in November, the Supreme Court overturned that decision. 8 years later, the county court ruling allowed Cruzan's parents to remove the feeding tube, and Cruzan died 11 days later, but had lived like this for 8 years after her car accident. This is the case that everybody knows. If you've been around for a while, and I wasn't even, I think I was 3 years old when this happened. So in the 1990s, the case of Terry Shivo. She was 26 years old. She collapsed at her home, was taken to the hospital. 4 months later, Michael, Terry's husband, was appointed her guardian. 8 years later, he filed a petition to withdraw life support, but Terry's parents were very opposed to this, and they did not want this to happen. 10 to 15 years later, in 2000 through 2005, several different things had happened. And in 2000, her lack of a living will, a trial was determined that Terry's wishes, what Terry's wishes would have been. In 2001, Terry's parents filed new evidence of Terry's wishes and claimed that new medical treatments were now available for her condition. In 2003, her feeding tube was removed for a second time, and a week later, a Florida legislator passed Terry's law, ordering that the feeding tube be reinserted. And this just makes me hang my head. I can't even imagine what this family was going through. In 2004, the Florida Supreme Court overturned the law as unconstitutional. And finally, in March of 2005, Terry's feeding tube was removed for the third and final time, and she was able to pass peacefully March 31st in 2005. So again, I talk about those cases because they are landmark cases where the evolution of advanced directives, and again, stressing the importance of advanced care planning, all of those people were under the age of 30. I mean, they were very, very young. And you don't plan for these things, but I'm 34. I have a living will. My husband and my parents are well aware of what I would and would not want. I have kids, so I feel like that's my due diligence as a wife, as a parent, to have those wishes in writing so that none of my family has to guess about it. So what are advanced directives? We're going to talk about a couple of the different types of advanced directives. So they're legal documents that allow patients to formally state their choices about what actions should or shouldn't be taken regarding their health care. And these are things that we need in place when we are no longer able to make our decisions for ourselves. Advanced directives become legally valid as soon as they are signed in front of a required witness or notary. I add a little side note, not all advanced directives require something to be notarized. So depends on your state, depends on the type of advanced directive that you're working with. If it requires a notary, it's going to have a spot for a notary and witnesses on it. Again, these advanced directives do not go into effect unless you as the patient are unable to make the decisions yourself. Each state has its own advanced directive forms, like I said, and patient changes to the advanced directive should be recorded and given to appropriate clinicians and proxies. So if you named your best friend from high school as your healthcare surrogate, and then a couple years later you get married, and you want to change your husband to be your proxy, then you would want to update those forms, give new copies to your doctor, new copies to your family. The person you're appointing should also always have a copy of these things as well. You should continue to reevaluate these forms as needed. We recently did my Nana's. My grandfather passed away 2 years ago, and she had not updated her proxy. So we had to sit down. We filled out new ones. She appointed my mother-in-law as her healthcare proxy. We got all new forms. We gave them to the doctors. We gave them to my mother-in-law. Everybody has a new copy. But unfortunately, that's something that we see often in an elderly population. Their spouse is named their person, and their spouse may pass away before they do. And so those forms don't get updated. It's not really something top on our priority list, but when you need it, you want to make sure that it's updated. So choosing not to have certain life-sustaining or aggressive medical treatment is different than refusing medical care. So just to clarify that, because you choose to have one thing done or not to have one thing done, doesn't mean that you're sacrificing all healthcare. We'll talk about that statement a little bit more when we talk about DNRs. There's a couple different types of advanced directives. The most common ones are a living will and a durable power of attorney. These are state-specific forms. So if you're outside of Florida, I might not be able to answer your questions, but there's a ton of information on the internet about your specific state and where you can find these documents. Again, you should always provide a copy to the proxy. You should have a backup. You should give them to your doctors. And if you have an attorney, if there's legal matters involved, your attorney should have a copy of this as well. Keep your original safe, but accessible. And I'm gonna harp on that. You don't want to have a do not resuscitate order saying, if you find me, not breathing in my bathroom, if 911 gets called and your your DNR is not right there where it needs to be, the paramedics are going to try to resuscitate you. They're not going to go, oh, what's the code to your safe? So I can go dig through all your files in the office and try and find that stuff. So you want to have it in a safe place, but it needs to be accessible. And again, this is where I talk about how the patients can carry a card stating that they have an advance directive and where it's located. And you should keep that in your wallet with your insurance cards, because that is the first place that emergency personnel are going to look. So a living will specifies future healthcare decisions when a patient with advanced illness becomes unable to make their own wishes. It describes the type of medical treatment the patient does or does not want, and it also identifies who their surrogate is going to be, who's their decision maker if they can't make their own decisions. Some examples of this are going to be like on the Florida form, it says, I do or do not want artificial hydration. So that's talking about like if you're passing away, do you want somebody to have an IV in you and have things going to try and keep you hydrated? There's specifications on feeding tubes. Do you want artificial nutrition? And that's talking about feeding tubes and us basically giving you like a formula type of sustenance to try and, keep your body hanging on. Now, is that life-saving treatment? No, but it's things that can prolong life in somebody who's critically ill. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, and you guys feel free to stop me and interrupt me if you have a specific question about any of these things. So a living will can range from general to very specific wishes. It's a legal document, but it is not medical order. So it's basically a reference guide for your family or your healthcare professionals to use to guide your treatment. A competent person can revoke that at any time. So if you say, you know what, I made a terrible decision, that isn't what I want, and you rip it up, you can do that if you're competent. Can be changed or revoked at any time if the patient is able to communicate and is competent, okay? You couldn't just say, if you were confused because now you have advanced dementia, you wouldn't be able to say, oh yeah, I don't want any of those things anymore. You have to be competent and able to communicate. Living wills are more limited than a durable power of attorney for healthcare. So a durable power of attorney for healthcare is a legal document which the patient names a specific person to be their proxy, again, if they're unable to make their own decisions. It's usually part of an advance directive, but may be separate it can be broader than only healthcare decisions. So this person might also be named like someone over their financials or the guarantor of an estate and things like that. So this document may also be called a medical power of attorney. The proxy can be whoever the patient wants it to be. And it should be someone that they trust because, and someone that like knows you and what you would or wouldn't want. And it's also a great piece of advice to have a backup person. I like to use examples. Here's another example. So I have a family friend and she called me all upset the other night and she says, I don't know what to do. The hospital just called me and mom's best friend is in the hospital and needs hospice. And they're asking my mom to sign for hospice. Well, her mom has advanced dementia and hasn't been able to make her own decisions for probably 3 or 4 years now. She's like, my mom has dementia. She doesn't even know how to drive her own car or she gets lost in her house. How the heck is she going to sign for somebody to go into hospice? She doesn't understand that. And it's because that person didn't update their records, didn't update their healthcare surrogate records. And so there was a second person named on there and it was another person. So they deferred to the second person because if not, if she was the only person named on there, she has dementia. She wouldn't have been able to sign for this patient. So just a good why behind there to always keep those things up to date and always have a backup plan. So as a proxy, they can speak with caregivers and make decisions based on previous conversations. If the patient's wishes are unknown, the proxy is the one that's going to decide what should or shouldn't happen. So again, it should be someone that you know well and someone that you trust to make decisions in your best interest. A proxy cannot be your doctor or a nurse who is providing professional care to the patient unless it's a relative. I'm a nurse. I can be my dad's healthcare proxy, if that makes sense. So unless they're a relative, you couldn't just go, oh, my doctor's so handsome and he's been my doctor for 20 years. I want him to be my proxy. That it doesn't work like that. That's not legal. So, advanced medical orders or AMOs. So there's a couple new, I'm saying newer things that are trending, and you see them in different states. It isn't as common here in Florida, but the more conversations we're having about advanced care planning, the more conversations we're having about end of life and palliative care, the more these things are coming up, okay? So there's things called MOST, POST, MOST, POST. All of them are just different acronyms for medical physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. And then also an OOH DNR, an out of hospital, do not resuscitate. So these are things that are used in conjunction with your advanced directives. Again, some states recognize them, some states do not recognize them. So the website is here, that if you guys want to write that down, or if Jerry can take notes, this is a website that you can go to, state specific. It can give you information on whether or not those things are recognized where you live, and if so, a little bit more information about them. So these different types of forms summarize the patient's wishes in the form of actual medical orders. So the other forms we talked about are orders. They're just guides. These are actual medical orders. It says in the next little section there, this is not an advanced directive. Excuse me. It is an actionable medical order that the doctor is going to sign, and it's an order. It can be used in emergency situations. A DNR, excuse me, talking too much. In an acute care setting, patients are generally what they call a full code, unless otherwise specified. So what is the difference between a full code and a DNR? In an acute care setting like this is talking about, so take a hospital. If I'm a patient and I'm a full code, that means if I stop breathing, if my heart stops, if my heart goes into a life-threatening rhythm, they are immediately going to do everything they can to resuscitate me and revive me, breathe for me, shock me, CPR, whatever needs to be done to revive me. Versus a do not resuscitate that says, I've made the decision that I don't want any of those things done. I don't want you to breathe for me. I don't want you to shock me. I don't want you to do CPR. Just let me pass. If everything starts shutting down, just let me be. And that's what it says, right? A DNR order means a natural death will be allowed to happen in the case of your heart stopping. Do not resuscitate doesn't mean that you can't have treatment, okay? So people will say to me, when I worked in the ER, people would say, well, I have a DNR. If I sign a DNR and I come to the ER, that means that the doctors aren't going to do anything for me. That is complete trash, okay? That has nothing to do with it. So if you have a do not resuscitate order and you come into the hospital because you can't breathe, you have pneumonia, you have COVID, you have something like that going on, it doesn't mean that we're not going to treat you. It doesn't mean we're not going to do everything we can to save you. So having that DNR just says, if my heart stops, leave me alone. Let me be peaceful. Let me have this natural death. It doesn't mean we can't treat everything else that's going on with you. You break your leg, we're going to fix it, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't get treatment. Some states and hospitals require a new DNR for each admission. That is not true in the state of Florida. You do not have to have a new DNR every time you come into the hospital. They will verify those things with you, right? So if you had a DNR and you were in the hospital last month and you came back to the hospital this month, they're going to say, hey, we see that you have a do not resuscitate order on file. Are those still your wishes? They're going to verify those are still your wishes, but you don't have to get a whole new one every time you come in. An out of hospital DNR is used when a person doesn't want to be resuscitated if they pass away outside of the hospital. I'll give you the why behind that. Statistically speaking, patients who suffer a cardiac arrest in the hospital setting versus outside of the hospital setting. In a hospital setting, CPR and revival efforts are started immediately, right? You're usually on monitors and things like that. So the likelihood of you surviving with full brain function after that is much higher than if you were to suffer a cardiac arrest outside of the hospital. You're outside riding your bike and you fall down, and because you're in cardiac arrest, the chances of you being a normal person, if you're revived and walking out of that hospital, are so much more slim in that setting, right? Because then you gotta, maybe somebody stops, maybe a bystander stops, maybe they know CPR, maybe they don't, maybe they call 911, hopefully somebody calls 911, then you gotta wait for an ambulance to get there, you gotta wait for the fire truck to get there, all of those things. The delay in your care is just so much more prolonged outside of the hospital. So some people are opting that new type of DNR. Without a physician signed out of hospital order, emergency crews have to do everything. So let's take that same scenario. If you are outside riding your bike, you have a DNR at home, it's on your fridge, you collapse while you're riding your bike. Someone calls 911, paramedics show up on scene. You don't have a DNR taped to your forehead, you're getting everything done. They're doing CPR, they're intubating you, they're gonna hook you up to the breathing machine, they're gonna do everything humanly possible, because if that yellow form is not in their face, somewhere where it's accessible, then they don't know. They immediately have to do everything that they can to resuscitate you. That is what that last statement there is about. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So here are several different resources for different types of advanced care planning and information regarding state-specific programs. And then my favorite one is at the bottom. It's about 5 wishes. So in the 5 wishes book, there's information on like lots of details, like where do you want to be when you are passing? Do you want to be at home? It even goes into detail about what type of music maybe you want to be playing. Who do you want to be there? Are there people you absolutely don't want to be there? There's a lot of very, very specific information. And in the state of Florida, it does not require a physician signature. You just need witnesses to say that you have completed that form. So it's really good. It's actually written at a 3rd grade reading level, so anybody can understand it. You don't have to be a doctor or a medical professional to be able to understand the verbiage in the book or anything like that. Just lots and lots of really strong information there. So advanced directives and orders in hospice care. So a lot of people think that to get hospice services, you have to have a DNR. You don't have to have a DNR to have hospice. That's a very, very common misconception. And so I'm dispelling that myth for you guys right here. You do not have to have a do not resuscitate order. Hospice staff is going to discuss the importance of advanced directives in preserving patient choice. So any of the patients that we meet with to talk about palliative services, to do advanced care planning, to talk about goals of care, we always bring these things up because we want you, while you're able, to be able to make those decisions for yourself. We don't want to leave your family out in the wind trying to figure out what you would or would not want. So we want to give them that support. And then we also do training on advanced directives, which is what we're talking about right now, in a variety of different settings. So if you had someone that you wanted to start this conversation with, maybe you have a sister or a brother who's, maybe they're not in the best condition, or maybe they aren't in the best health, or you've noticed that they're declining. These are just a couple little things that you can try to give them advice on to start that conversation. So we obviously know it's very difficult to have this conversation. Advanced care planning is a reoccurring conversation about the patient's goals, what their values are, what their treatment preferences would or wouldn't be, and again, keeps the focus on the patient. It includes things like advanced care planning and talking about medical power of attorney, who's going to make your decisions for you, brother. If you go, if you start chemo and you don't do well with that, something happens, you end up in the hospital, who's going to make your decisions? Who are they going to call? When it's possible, schedule conversations early in a disease process when the patient is mentally and emotionally healthy. You don't want to have these conversations right after getting if somebody says, hey, you have stage 4 cancer, you don't want to be like, hey, so while you're here, I want to talk to you about DNRs and advanced care planning. That's not the time, right? Give them some time to digest those things. But you also don't want to wait until it's late in the disease process, because then, are they going to be able to make the right decisions? Are they going to make decisions based off of how bad they feel and things like that? So you got to find that sweet spot. And I think a lot of that varies on what type of medical condition or terminal illness that you might be talking about. So readily available tools and trainings make difficult conversations easier. Again, the websites that I just showed you guys on that previous slide give you a lot of information on where to turn, some things you can read up on to try and make those conversations a little bit easier. And this is what we call the spikes method, which is basically what we just talked about. You want to find the right setting. You want to know what that person's thinking when you're talking to them. What do they think their disease process is like, or what their illness is like? Or maybe they're perfectly healthy right now. You guys just want to get this conversation on the books. That's kind of a method to have that conversation. I think that's it. I don't want to go into the physician billing aspect of things. So I'm going to leave you guys with this closing thought. And it says, I have an advance directive, not because I have a serious illness, but because I have a family. And that really just hits home, right? Nobody wants to think about end of life. Nobody wants to think about the days that we're not going to be able to make decisions for ourselves. But to do what's best for your family, to relieve and alleviate that burden from your family and your loved ones. This is just such an easy way of making sure that what your thoughts, your wishes, your values are actually going to come to fruition for you when you are faced with that challenge. So that's all I have, Jerry. I don't know if anybody else had any questions.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. A great presentation. And I add in the chat all the links of the websites and the information you sent. So I put it on the chat if anyone wants to copy or have that.
Awesome. And I'm sure that Jerry can kind of set those things up after this as well for the participants. So Stephanie, Phyllis, is there, if you guys want to unmute, ask any questions or talk about anything, you're more than welcome to. And I don't want to leave you hanging with anything. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Jerry, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you guys today and talk about this. Again, it's very near and dear to my heart. So Gloria, thanks for setting everything up. And Jerry, we're always here if we can do anything to help support you guys, okay?
Thank you so much again, Brittany, for your time. And
Absolutely.
so I think they say Stephanie say thanks a lot for the information. So
Absolutely.
it's always a pleasure to support Jerry.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Jerry.